Every raindrop that hit my small Seattle apartment window was like a hammer blow to my broken heart. As the sound of my newborn twins' cries echoed across the room, I paused, holding on tightly to Lily and Grace. Just seconds before, the sound of the door slamming shut filled the room, creating an enveloping sensation. My beloved James, whom I had hoped would be my companion for all time, had abandoned me. "I can't handle this anymore, Emily." His comments stabbed me to the core. "We don't belong together." I glared at the door, hoping it would open so I could wake up from this nightmare. But that wasn't the case. His fading footsteps were succeeded by the sound of a sleek black automobile careening into the rain as he departed along the corridor. I fell to the floor, my knees giving way under the crushing weight of betrayal. How could love, which is so intense and genuine, fall apart in an instant? What gives this father the right to desert his own children when he vowed to watch over us? Little twins, oblivious to the vacuum their father had created, extended their little hands toward me. Being a single mother with two delicate lives resting on my shoulders in that stifling darkness made me feel completely alone. However, a flame ignited within me, a determination not to let this event define who I am. Can I get up from this rubble? Is it possible to start over from the rubble of a shattered ambition? Even though I didn't know it at the time, I was soon to learn. My tale is one of devastating loss, and finding the will to put myself back together again. If all you knew crumbled in an instant, what would you do? 3 years ago, my aspirations were brilliant colors on a canvas in Seattle. At the age of 25, I was a graphic designer living my dream in a vibrant city that seemed to have endless possibilities. Pike Place Market was bustling with activity, with sellers yelling seagulls clucking and the rich scent of roasted coffee wafting through the throng. The air tasted like Puget Sound, and it felt like the whole market was alive with activity. I met James Whitaker at a little cafe that was nestled between a bookshop and a flower stand. At a corner table, I was drawing logos while my latte became cold when he came over. His hazel eyes gleamed with an air of subtle self-assurance, and his grin was as inviting as sunshine streaming through a cloudy sky. "Do you mind if I take a seat?" he inquired with a low, seductive voice. Unaware that this moment would alter everything, I nodded. I had never encountered somebody like James. Although he didn't show off his money or position, I found out later that he was the next in line to inherit the tech empire of the Whitaker family, whose names were on buildings all throughout Seattle. In my memory, he was only James, a simple person who took my remarks seriously and laughed readily. Art, music, and the electric vibe of a city at sunset were the topics of our many hours of conversation that day. I was completely captivated by the time the cafe shut down. Our love blossomed rapidly, the unbreakable type. As we strolled hand in hand down the shore, we could see the Ferris wheel's lights reflected in the water. "You're my sanctuary, Emily," he would murmur, his breath softly caressing my ear. I didn't doubt him. We were unstoppable in my mind. All that happiness in those first several months flew by. James showed me the best hidden spots. Little jazz joints on Capitol Hill, peaceful beaches on Bainbridge Island to watch the sun go down. My heart would flutter with every one of his unexpected handwritten messages that he would put into my notebook. Never before had I felt so valued or seen. James acted as if it were his personal triumph when I secured my first major freelance website design job for a nearby company. He whirled me around our beloved park until we both fell to our knees in laughter on the grass. To my naive self, I believed that this dreamlike existence would continue on indefinitely. I discovered, though, that love can't last on its own. I discovered I was expecting our first child 6 months into our relationship. As I presented James with the test, my palms quivered with a mix of anxiety and optimism. His expression brightened and he embraced me tightly. "Emily, we're going to be a family," he declared, his voice betraying his thoughts. "I'll make sure you're okay." For an instant, I allowed myself to be hopeful about that future. A small house, our kid, and a life based on love. I promise. But I would quickly learn that promises are not always rock solid. Meeting James's mother, Eleanor Whitaker, was the first fracture in the armor. The vast home on their Medina estate was completely different from my little flat. It had marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and walls adorned with artwork that I had previously only seen in museums. At Eleanor's gala, I felt like an outsider in my sundress, surrounded by elegantly fitted suits and shimmering dresses. Seated in the room's middle, she possessed hawk-like keen eyes and flawless silver hair. Her tone was kind but cold, and her eyes were busy analyzing me as she remarked, "So you're the artist James speaks of." The phrase and hit me like a rock loaded with judgment. James seemed strained, his shoulders tight as I held his hand. I felt as though the room was closing in on me, as the noise from the elite's conversations overwhelmed my racing mind. Eleanor's investigation was unrelenting. While we were eating, she brought up topics like responsibility, heritage, and the Whitaker name, which I was starting to understand, had a heavy burden. She said, "Our family has expectations," and she stared at me the whole time. James spoke very little, his quiet speaking volumes. I hoped against hope that our love would overcome his mother's influence and that he would remain my rock. However, uncertainty crept in like a poison. I used to find him glued to his phone in the middle of the night, with messages from Eleanor flashing over the screen. He would avoid looking at me and remark, "It's nothing," but his voice sounded empty. The joy and promises of our first days together brought me a sense of stability, so I held on to them. However, I could feel the earth moving beneath my feet, and I could see a storm brewing on the horizon. My foolish belief was that love could triumph over all. Yeah, I was completely incorrect. The man who made me feel like the world revolved around him would eventually abandon me, and I don't know how I could have anticipated that. Every drop of rain served as a visual representation of the internal tempest that hadn't abated for days. The cramped quarters on Capitol Hill, Seattle, made me feel like I was shackled as I held my twin daughters, Lily and Grace, in my arms. Aside from the pain in my chest, the only sound was their gentle whimpering. My entire life came crashing down the week following their birth. In the doorway stood James Whitaker, the man I had loved with all my heart. His brown eyes were empty, and his shoulders drooped as if he were carrying a mountain. At first, I was naive and thought he was going to come and hold us to start our family life. I smiled. His expression, however, betrayed a different story, one of submission. "Emily, we really should have a conversation." He muttered, his voice barely audible above the radiator's hum. With shaking hands, I lowered the twins into their cot and then turned to face him. "James, what's wrong?" Fear welled up in my gut, and my voice trembled. His response was delayed. He strolled about his boots, making scratches on the weathered floors. Before coming to a halt, his eyes locked on the window, which was stained with raindrops. "I can't do this anymore," he cried, his words cutting to the quick. "I simply cannot." My pulse halted and the atmosphere became frigid. I'm unable to. My voice trembling, I whispered it again. He avoided looking at me as he swallowed forcefully. This is it. Us. You. The babies. His words crashed like a ton of bricks, crushing the tenuous optimism I'd held onto. As my thoughts raced to try to make sense of everything, I froze. Will you be departing, abandoning me, forgetting about your own people? Raw and frantic, my voice swelled, even as he drew back his face, betrayed the determination of a man who had already decided. The words, "My mother was right," came out of his mouth with a hint of embarrassment. Emily, we aren't meant to be in the same universe. Just thinking about Eleanor Whitaker, with her icy gray eyes and steely determination, gave me the willies. I am clearly not the person you are looking for. It had been her victory. We lost him because of her ultimatums and whispers. Tears started to fall before I could even stifle my shaking head. You've decided on her, controlled by your mother, her wealth and influence over your family. My speech was an impassioned cry, an outcry, and a request. However, James remained silent. He remained still, an outsider inhabiting the person I cherished. I recognized him for the coward he had become. At that very moment, a puppet moving to the tune of Eleanor's strings. Under the starry skies of Seattle, James had sworn to protect us and had laughed with me, but now he was gone. You're leaving your daughters behind, I said, my voice quivering. You will cause them to grow up without a father figure. He said, his expression betraying the anguish in his eyes. A barely audible "I'm sorry" from his lips as he shifted his attention to the door. Oh, how I wanted to go over to him, seize his arm, and implore him to remain. However, I was immobilized by his treachery, and my body refused to move. Slamming shut the door sounded like a gunshot. No sign of him. As my own muted sobbing mixed with the twins' cries, I collapsed to the floor. In the oppressive quiet between their cries, the flat seemed like a tomb, cold and dead. Half expecting James to hurry back and claim it was a mistake, I peered at the door. However, this was not the case. The monotonous, cruel rain was the sole sound. When I thought of the gaping hole in my heart, a sharp scar where love had resided, the agony of giving birth paled in comparison. He must have some kind of magic to pull this off. After holding me and whispering promises of eternity, how could the man abandon me without a second thought? The little naive girls, Lily and Grace, had no clue that their father had abruptly abandoned them. They relied on me, but I was exhausted, devastated, and felt like a ghost. Nights gradually became more numerous and darker as the days passed. I had trouble sleeping and eating. The twins' warmth would be the sole thing, preventing me from collapsing, so I would clutch them tight. There were a lot of dirty dishes in the sink and stray diapers all over the floor, but that didn't bother me. The only things visible to me were James's last words, his afflicted eyes, and his face. I went over every detail, trying to figure out what I might have done better or what clues I could have missed. Was I too innocent, too trusting? Had I let him down in some way? I waited for answers, yet the questions persisted. Even though my friends' voices were muted, I allowed the phone to ring nevertheless. My life was in shambles, and I couldn't bear to look into their pitiful eyes or find the words to describe it. Afterwards, I found a letter with the Whitaker crest embossed on the envelope that had slid under my door one morning. I opened it with trembling hands. In a formal agreement, Eleanor offered me $100,000 to relinquish all claims to James and remain silent regarding the twins. Her phrases were clinical and icy. an extortion disguised as philanthropy. Fury coursed through me, more intense than my sorrow. In her mind, she could just write a check to destroy my children's existence and purchase my dignity. The letter was shredded by me, and the fragments scattered across the floor like snow. In a low, hushed voice that was both terrified and angry, I proclaimed to the gathering that no one owned me. At that same second, everything changed. I wasn't that helpless. Being a mother, I felt obligated to protect Lily and Grace from a life characterized by their father's frailty. I would fight for them even if I didn't know how. Regarding US, the path ahead was gloomy and unclear, but I would traverse it anyhow. Am I able to start over from scratch? Would my daughters be satisfied with me? That was the least I could do. The days that followed James's departure were shrouded in an increasingly dense veil of melancholy. Grief was my sole company in my little dreary Seattle apartment, which seemed like a jail, with their little faces guiding me back. From the brink, my newborn twins, Lily and Grace, served as my anchor. But love wasn't enough. Action was what was needed for survival. With 2 newborns relying on me, I was a single mother without a job or funds. I couldn't give in to the crushing weight of it. For their sake as much as mine, I had to take a stance. I needed to locate a job first. I was a freelance graphic designer before having twins doing work for Capitol Hill area companies on things like logos and websites. Then I became a mother, and that was really it. Even though my laptop was the sole light source in the room, I drafted cover letters with shaky fingers and sent out hundreds of applications in the middle of the night. Quickly and devastatingly, I was met with rejection after rejection. "We require an individual who is more accessible," remarked a particularly restrained recruiter. "Your situation, it's just not a good fit." Another more delicately conceded, but with equal ferocity. They didn't see a professional, they saw a single mother. No one was interested in hiring a woman who couldn't guarantee late hours or last-minute appointments, and I wanted to yell out and tell them that I was more than my situation. In order to pay for diapers and formula, I sold the silver necklace that James had given me, a necklace that I had dearly adored. Every dollar was a constant reminder of how precarious our situation was. Daytime was easier than nights. As they awoke, the twins' cries broke the stillness. As my eyesight became blurry from tiredness, I would use one hand to change diapers and the other to look through employment postings. On days when I really needed to save money, I would wrap the children in additional blankets and forgo TV coffee and even heat. My diet consisted mostly of rice and canned beans, and I learned to stretch each meal out like a tightrope dancer teetering on a void. I wanted to just curl up and hide from the world at times, but then I'd see Grace's little clenched fists or Lily's bright blue eyes, and a fire would flare inside me. Their mother should have battled for them, not given up. My dearest friend from college, Sarah Coleman, was the unexpected source of hope. With a smile that shone brighter than the gloomy Seattle sky, she arrived one rainy day, arms laden with groceries. "Emily, you're not in this alone," she reassured me as she embraced me tightly. While I vented my anxieties and humiliations, she sat by my side and listened. Instead of offering sympathy, Sarah proposed a solution. She said, "You're a creator," gesturing over the scribbles all over my desk. "Just put that to use." Her words guided me out of my despair and into the light. Even when I was a little girl, I enjoyed sewing little dresses for my dolls. Perhaps I could create a calming item for the twins. To begin, I made simple plush toys out of discarded fabric and wood pieces found at a charity store. These included things like miniature wooden blocks, painted with non-toxic colors and plush stars. Grace and Lily adored them. I hadn't heard the sound of their laughter in weeks. I tagged an Instagram shot I shared on a whim with Made with Love for my girls. I was shocked to see how many comments it received. Say, where can I find a store that sells these? A mother inquired. These are just too cute, added a third. I didn't recognize the chants until Sarah pushed me to. Emily, they may be sold. I was terrified to do it, since I lacked the necessary capital and commercial acumen, but her confidence in me inspired me to give it a go nevertheless. In honor of the little joys that my girls brought into my life, I decided to call my new company Tiny Joys. I shopped thrift stores for eco-friendly textiles and borrowed a sewing machine from a neighbor, all with Sarah's assistance. While the twins slept, I improved my sewing skills by watching videos on YouTube. With spools of bamboo and cotton thread strewn across the floor, my flat transformed into a makeshift workshop. My fingers were hurting from sewing plush animals and delicate baby garments late into the night, but my heart was racing. My graphic design abilities were put to good use when I created a basic website and featured my initial Wears Organic cotton onesies and hand-painted wooden rattles. I cried not out of grief, but a twinge of pride when I received the first order from a mother in Tacoma. It was a minor accomplishment. Surviving wasn't enough. I was really making things. However, advancement was gradual. Receipts of orders were slow and barely covered expenses. There was a complete lack of response from parenting blogs and local boutiques that I contacted via email. An irate store owner said handmade toys. Nobody buys that anymore, I thought to myself, questioning whether I was just living out a pipe dream. Then the worst hit my largest transaction. To that point, a dozen items was abruptly canceled by the purchaser. Sitting amid my fabric remnants, I felt like a failure and started to cry. "Emily, keep going," Sarah said, and I couldn't help but think about it. Looking at my sleeping twins, their features serene in the moonlight, I realized I couldn't stop. You're stronger than you realize. There was no other reason but them. My strategy shifted, with the gentle morning light and the distant Seattle skyline as my backdrop. I was able to take better shots of the Tiny Joys items. I began a blog to chronicle my journey as a single mother who from scratch built her goal. I didn't join parenting organizations to make sales, but to connect with other parents and share my experiences. The tide eventually changed. A Portland mother placed an order for a playset. Next, there's one in Spokane. Once word got out, everything changed in the blink of an eye. A Seattle parent who has thousands of followers on Instagram posted a photo of her son cuddling up with my plush whale and raved about how great it was. She proclaimed Tiny Joys is a game changer in her writing. There were hundreds of messages and orders flooding my inbox. As the twins napped, Sarah helped me attach labels on the boxes, and I was barely able to keep up. It seemed as if I were creating something substantial for the very first time. I felt vibrant. However, with expansion came new difficulties. A competitor, a major participant in the eco-toy industry, accused my designs of infringing their patents and sent a cease and desist letter. Without the means to hire an attorney, I felt helpless in the face of an overwhelming corporate power. After Tiny Joys, I believed it was over. Sarah put me in touch with a single father who believed in my case and offered his services as a pro bono attorney. We devoted weeks to research into design documents and other materials meant to establish the uniqueness of my work. There was an air of smugness and sharpness throughout the courtroom, which was unsettling. Still, we emerged victorious. Tiny joys became a symbol of the underdog triumphing over adversity when the judge granted my request and the case gained local attention. A lot of parents in the Pacific Northwest started using my brand, and my orders went through the roof. Over the course of a year, Tiny Joys expanded in ways I could never have imagined. I relocated us to a more airy Queen Anne flat that had room for a real workshop. Kids all around the nation were delighted with the toys and clothing that my tiny team composed primarily of single mothers like me created. It wasn't only about the money. I worked harder than ever before to prove to my children that I could provide for them. With each stitch and sale, I took a step closer to the future I had created for myself. Even if the nagging agony of James's treachery had subsided, it was still there. The woman who had broken down in tears on the floor at the sight of a man's frailty was no more. Mother creator and warrior, that was me, Emily Harper. I felt I had given my daughters, Lily and Grace, something irreplaceable, a mother who would never give up on them. Their laughter filled our house as they thrived. Am I allowed to continue? Could I handle whatever happened after that? I was prepared to investigate. At the Seattle Center, the annual Eco Kids Expo was a hive of activity, with parents bringing their children to see the exhibits and participate in the activities. My booth, Tiny Joys, was right in the middle of it all. Under gentle lighting, I showcased my organic cotton clothing and wooden toys, all of which were testaments to the life I had constructed from nothing. The mother was raving about how much she enjoyed our story, and I stood behind the counter grinning, giving a stuffed star to a child who was laughing and playing. The sound of Sarah's companions, Lily and Grace, laughing echoed through the throng as they played at a neighboring playground. It had been years since I had felt so stable, as if the floor were really underneath me. It had taken all I had to pull myself up out of the depths of sorrow and stand here now entire and proud. But twists are what fate likes. A shadow swept across the booth as I restocked a stack of onesies. I felt a shiver go up my spine, and my hands went limp before I even lifted them to my eyes. That weight, that subtle presence I was familiar with. James Whitaker was standing a few steps away when I slowly lifted my eyes to see. Even though he had broken my heart 3 years ago, the man appeared different now. The charismatic heir with impeccable taste was no more. He appeared weary with brown eyes that had lost their luster and a slouched posture that made him look like he was under some unseen strain. His once sharp suit was now somewhat crumpled, and he had streaks of gray in his hair. I briefly felt a sense of something, maybe pity, because time hadn't been kind to him. It arrived, but it went just as fast. Emily, he murmured, his voice low and uncertain, as if he were uncertain of his authority to mention my name. Even though my heart was racing, I straightened up and put on an act of composure. Under the crushing weight of this moment, the throng surrounding us appeared to dissipate. The expo's ambient hubbub was drowned out. "James, what brings you to this place?" My tone was steady, but the inquiry had a bite to it, cutting through his timid demeanor. With a tight grip on his hands, he adjusted himself and cast a quick glance over to the booth where the Tiny Joys logo gleamed brightly. "I noticed your name in the program," he remarked, his expression seemingly betraying astonishment. "I must have seen you." My eyes remained fixed as I crossed my arms. Why, though seemingly innocuous, the term encapsulated years of suffering and unresolved concerns. His jaw clenched as he glanced downward, and then he turned his expressionless face back to me. "I was completely mistaken, Emily," he said, his voice quivering. "How naive of me. It was a mistake for me to abandon you and the daughters." His regret-laden comments didn't strike a chord with me the way they would have with me years ago, but I'm still paying the price for letting my mom rule me. Too many battles had been waged and too many tears shed for me to let his regret to hold me back. Looking closely at him, I cocked my head. "And only now you're getting it." 3 years later, despite my composed demeanor, I spoke with great intensity, as if each word were a reminder of the time he had taken. He recoiled in fear, his hands moving out from his sides as if to grab onto me before returning to their original positions. "I caught wind of your appearance on the news," he murmured, sounding almost guilty. "Your brand, the lawsuit, and all that you've ever accomplished, you're just amazing. Furthermore, you are essential to my being. It's empty even if I have the Whitaker name, the money, and the land. My heart breaks every morning because I've lost the one thing that truly meant to me." I should have felt triumphant, vindicated by his confession of my suffering. However, this was not the case. I felt like I'd outgrown the narrative and it was empty. My voice was low yet forceful as I stepped closer. "You managed to keep us, James. It was your decision to leave." My statements were unwavering, but they weighed the burden of every restless night rejection and moment of self-doubt. "You preferred your mother's world over your own daughter's." His glistening eyes transported me back to the man I once loved, the one who had promised me eternal love and shared laughter with me on the beach. My specter had passed. I was no longer afflicted by his presence. "I know," he said, his voice quivering with emotion. "Obviously, there's no way for me to backtrack now. I only wanted you to know that I'm sorry. It's not that I desire your return or anticipate your forgiveness." As he begged for forgiveness, I felt nothing but clarity. All he wanted was for you to know that you were my one and only true love. I was not in need of his sorrow, affection, or apologies. Without him, I had created a life of which I could be proud. His criticisms had no bearing on it. A stern, unforgiving grin spread across my face. The woman's smile betrayed her newfound confidence. "James, I am not need to be informed of that," I declared with an unwavering voice. "I am not in need of your affection or your shame. That was then. I have created an actual personal creation. You're not involved and you never will be." The realization washed over him like a wave, causing his brow to curl into a frown. No words escaped his lips even as he opened them. With a gentler but equally powerful tone, I went on. "I made my decision long ago, and you did the same. I'm overjoyed, James, despite you, not because of you." He appeared to be paralyzed, as if the entire world had collapsed around him. Lily and Grace were sprinting toward me, their expressions exuding pure delight as I peered past him. As soon as Sarah caught sight of James, she trailed behind him, her pupils narrowing. Finally, I shifted my attention back to him. "James, you must look for yourself." I walked back, knelt down, and gathered my kids into my arms, feeling their warmth reassure me. "Mommy, we saw a big slide." Screaming uncontrollably, Grace completely ignored the man standing just a few feet away. I leaned in, kissed her forehead, and then turned away, laughing. For an extended period, James remained still, his figure barely visible in the midst of the throng. His sad eyes were on me, but he didn't drag me in. No longer was I ensnared by him or any of the agony that had previously defined me. Their cotton candy-covered hands made me feel lighter than I have in years as I escorted Lily and Grace back to the booth. Tiny Joy's My Invention and Legacy was surrounded by a buzzing exhibition as parents and children marveled at it. Instead of reacting angrily or emotionally, I had the poise and strength of a woman who had rebuilt herself as she confronted her history. Retaliation or victory against James weren't the goals here. Everything revolved around me, my existence rebuilt from the ruins he left behind. Is it possible for me to proceed? Would this fortitude be enough to face whatever was ahead? I had faith in my ability. The living room of my new house in Seattle's Queen Anne district was bathed in a golden glow as sunlight poured through the huge windows. There was a delicate blend of coffee aromas and the subtle fragrance of lavender wafting from a mantel candle. The laughter of 3-year-olds Lily and Grace echoed like music as they raced around the room. At my workplace, which was a modern wood table covered in fabric samples and sketches, I was going over the terms of Tiny Joy's newest collaboration with a major eco-friendly shop. I had grown my company from a little idea sewed together in a little apartment, the product of many late hours of worrying and unwavering optimism. It was a sensation, a brand that moms all across the nation relied on for eco-friendly apparel and toys that brought happiness to their kids. A sense of modest pride warmed my chest as I reclined in my chair. I worked hard to earn this life and this pleasure. It had been a challenging voyage. Raising Lily and Grace on my own was a huge burden, but I had pulled myself out of depression, dealt with rejection, and battled litigation. Nevertheless, I had emerged from each adversity a changed person. Remembering the shattered lady who had cried on the floor upon James Whitaker's departure. That was then. From mother to creator to survivor, I was Emily Harper, beyond my wildest dreams. Tiny Joy's has grown to include flagship locations in Portland and Seattle, with a third one in the works for Denver. Together with a crew of skilled artisans, many of whom were single mothers like me, I was able to create items that were more than simply pretty. They had purpose. Along with Lily and Grace, my happy face was included in a spread on women entrepreneurs last month. Our story served as a light for others, and the magazine was a big player in the industry. Even though I didn't seek for the limelight, I confidently stood tall when it arrived. I brought the girls on a picnic to Gasworks Park this morning, so we could see the glitter of the Seattle skyline across Lake Union. As Lily and Grace raced over the grass, their laughter radiated like the spring sun, and their little shoes kicked up dandelion seeds. Enjoying a tranquility that I had battled for with all my might, I reclined on a blanket and drank iced coffee. A mother came over her small child, cradling a plush whale from Tiny Joy's. "Are you Emily Harper?" She questioned, her enthusiasm evident in her big eyes. "Tiny Joy's creator." As I grinned, I nodded. "I'm absolutely smitten," she exclaimed. "Your narrative, it's remarkable. Imagine if you had started from the very bottom and ended up here." Not because I was looking for validation, but because I didn't know my story might inspire others. Her words swept over me like a gentle wave. "I simply persisted," I whispered. As she strode away, her toddler wagging tail, I felt my heart leap for joy. This had grown beyond my control. I no longer carried the spirits of James and Eleanor Whitaker, his mother. Somewhere far from the dazzling skyscrapers of Seattle, I had heard rumors that James had severed relations. With Eleanor abandoned the Whitaker empire and begun over. I was indifferent as to whether or not he was pleased. It was his road to take, and I had already picked mine. A subtle apathy had taken the place of the wrath that had before consumed me. To be free, all I had to do was let go, not forgive him. I had finally put an end to that chapter that day at the fair when I confronted him and then walked away. With my daughters, my job, and my purpose, my life was here. I cuddled up on the couch that night with Lily and Grace, their little bodies tucked under my arms. Before I put them to sleep, I told them a tale not of fanciful countries or fairy tales, but of a strong lady who injured her arm and then got back up again. With a gentle tone, I remarked, she was strong because she never gave up, even when the world felt too heavy. Grace glanced up, her eyes big and intrigued. How did she feel, Mommy? She kissed my forehead, and my heart swelled with joy. My darling, yes. I stood in the doorway and watched them sleep as I put them to bed, their breathing calm and steady. She created her own bliss. To keep battling and growing, they were my everything. As I crossed to the balcony, I could see the city lights sparkling below. In front of me lay Seattle, a city that had witnessed both my lowest points and my highest points. Neither a guy nor anybody else was necessary for my completion or rescue. I had rescued myself. It was all mine, my joy, my future, my power, that I had to work for, and I had to cry for it. I felt a surety I'd never experienced before, as I closed my eyes, feeling the chilly night air brush over my skin. I had arrived at my destiny's doorstep. Just what was I taught? It is your response, not the difficulty, that defines you. You may emerge from adversity stronger and wiser. Discover your calling, even if it's by taking baby steps as I did, with tiny joys like Sarah did for me. Surround yourself with positive people. Forget about what has happened in the past. Choosing yourself is more important than forgetting. Share your tale with me. Get up. How are you going to do it? Post it here and let's motivate one another. Never stop seeking your personal light.